Hey everyone, welcome back. It's Lucid, and I am once again joined by Sai.
This is Sai, and I'm once again joining Lucid.
And it's been a while since Sai and I have recorded. It's kind of been amazing because we had like a big batch of like built up episodes. So on YouTube, it's just been like a nice continuous stream. But we've actually run out of our batch. We have one episode that hasn't uploaded yet uh, when we're recording this. So yeah, I'm glad Sai was free tonight so we could do this. But um,
Yeah, we can build that backlog right back up.
yeah. Okay. So we're kind of in a slow time. I think that's kind of the summary right now. TNG is continuing to just hold their ground. You know, as they would say in South Park, he's standing his ground. And everybody's kind of gearing up for the next war. And it's looking like the next major engagement is going to involve Gath and Zabalba. And Vedheim also is still alive, as they're reminding us here in their note. So
Yeah, but Vettiheim is still alive in their capital, just being more expensive to take out than it might be worth like pulling the trigger on. They're not alive in the sense of actually being a contender to influence the game at this point.
yeah, that's mostly true. Except they do have some globals.
Right.
It's,
Illwinter
it's actually
being, yeah,
Yeah, Illwinter and Maelstrom. So, you know,
yeah,
that's worth something.
this late, I think that Maelstrom is mostly valuable in the sense that like it means that they might be able to launch like a clutch murdering winter at some point, but not in the sense that the global itself is that valuable, because trying to fight for a global slot this late in the game only really makes sense when the global has an immediate impact, right? Like if you're spending 300 gems on a gem generation global, that's never going to pay off before the game ends when it gets this late.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, now Vedheim's had this up for a while, so I'm pretty sure it's paid for itself. But, you know, they're not going to be leading any gym charts just because they have Maelstrom, given their size. Okay, so let's start with a message from TNG. Message from Latch. And now Latch has been doing most of the turns now for TNG. Demosthenes, I think, is mostly the figurehead, but is not doing most of the work. Pan used the Fountain of Youth to tank Wind of Death this turn. Pretty hyped, to be honest. It doesn't really keep you alive through a normal battle, unfortunately, which is why we can't afford to hit. God, I think we missed that in the last episode. I don't think I noticed.
Yeah, like we
Um,
noticed that the wad trap went off, but I don't think that we caught that it was able to do minimal damage because of the presence of the artifact. But yeah, that's one of those really interesting things is that the Fountain of Youth's like primary effect that people are getting it for isn't generally the anti-aging. Like usually that's just like, oh well, that's a thing, and then you don't really notice it. But yeah, the fact that they were pulling it out in order to actually like use it in battle is really cool.
yeah, I think, you know, it makes sense because it affects the aging, like the starting age of units that are recruited in the province the artifact's in, I believe. So I think it works on like if you're playing Abyssia or something and you have old age cap only mages, it makes sense to like make the artifact there. But this is, I think, the actual coolest use case, which is tanking Wind of Death.
Yeah, because that's not
Um,
usually a spell that like you see explicit counters for other than magic resistance.
right. Okay. If we used if we used an army of mostly celestial soldiers and mages with those unaging blood boots, maybe we could do it. Oh, wait, what is he saying? Oh, life through a normal battle. Unfortunately, we cannot afford to hit our unaging blessed sacreds with Wind of Death in
So
battle.
basically, in
Okay.
order to basically prolong the decay effect, in order to make it effective even against Fountain of Youth, because
Ah,
Fountain of Youth slows down aging by like 75%, I believe.
right.
So he's basically saying, well, what can we do to put even more long-lived things in against the Wind of Death,
I
or
wonder if
alongside the
it
Wind of Death?
stacks. Like if you have an unaging bless, would that stack with the artifact? Because I think the artifact applies to both sides. I don't think it's maybe it's only one side. I thought it was like a province effect, like where it affected the whole province, not necessarily just one
That's
army.
what it says. I do believe that it stacks with Unaging just because the effect is different. Unaging is half, and the
Hmm.
artifact is 75%. And I similarly would expect it to be the same with Boots of Youth, with slow aging 90%. But I don't actually know. The only reason that I'm saying that is that typically effects that are the same don't stack. Like how like
Right.
FR5 and FR10 do stack. It's just like hard to get them to cast it sometimes.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
so along the same lines, unless Unaging is taking the highest value, then I expect that it would stack. Again, just because the numbers are different, and that's typically mattered when it comes to Illwinter logic for what stacks and what doesn't.
Yeah, and the decay effect has been kind of notoriously buggy. There are a lot of bugs related to decay, especially at like the launch of Dominion 6. I know Arco and I were reporting a lot of them. I think they mostly got fixed, but it yeah, it's kind of like at one point the unaging effect wasn't affecting the amount of damage you took, even though it would affect the age. I can't remember exactly what all the bugs were. I think that was one of them, but
It's also a mechanic that I think is poorly understood enough, just because it's such a like a relatively late game effect that when you see it, you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to lose some units, and going into like the nuances of
yeah.
exactly how it works isn't something that most people even need to do. Such that then you don't need to worry about like whether or not this particular unaging effect stacks. Like this is such late game, big game dominions things that most people probably never even have needed to interact with it that in this sort of depth.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot. Oh, I think I remember the other part of the bug. There was another part of the bug where like it would display different from what it did. So like it would display you aged 5 years or something, but you'd only age one.
That
So
one's
I don't
an
know. There were
catch. Yeah.
okay, yeah.
So
Uh,
like
but it's
I
definitely complicated enough and late enough in the game where people just see it and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's working as intended." Like no matter whether it's like that quickness bug in Dominions 5 where it gave you 4x the attacks, but it took people forever to notice.
yeah, it's like, well, these guys are quicker, so they're hitting faster. And
Yeah,
like only a handful of people are actually reading the combat log and be like, oh, these guys are hitting much faster.
exactly. Okay, that would be pretty interesting to see, but it's not really going to happen this game. Okay. And then, of all the annoying things about fighting multiple different people at the same time, the worst is when you really need to worry about one or the other attacking the same province and you don't know which it is. And you really need to guess who you'll be prepared to script against accordingly. Definitely some pretty bad things can happen this turn if I guess wrong. Well, that's exciting.
Yeah, maybe we'll actually see a big fight then. But yeah, agreed. One of the big things about like fighting coalition, one of the like big advantages aside from just like the multiple magic phase things, is basically just the difference in what the different sides can bring to bear. Because like in many ways, being just like one power fighting multiple, as long as you're like sufficiently bigger to do that, is actually the advantage, right? Because your resources consolidated, your armies are all fighting together, right? So you have the
Yeah.
concentration of force advantage. But if the two sides are like able to do very, very different things, then that becomes like significantly harder to counter.
Right. Because it's hard to script and protect against all the different options. Do you want to read Gath?
Sure. A fun thing happened last turn. TC's mage dropped from the void right into number 249, just one turn after the DoD capture operation. Even more funny is that we actually seriously considered this possibility, given how many returning spells of all kinds have been used this game by different people, and it's not something domes or patrols can protect from. However, even if he dropped there last turn, he would see the script setup but not the actual DoD capture. But still, what is the probability of him dropping exactly there? I am considering returning the staff to TC as a favor, because potential perpetual storm will remove the need for storm stabs for a while.
Oh, I guess the mage that returned was carrying that storm staff. About that.
Yeah. It's also kind of funny that like he spent all this time trying to prevent people from seeing this, and then whoops, mage shows up there anyways.
Yeah, that's. I mean, if you're gonna get revealed, that's the classiest way to have it happen. Is
By
a guy
complete
just
accident.
randomly coming in from the void.
Now to the serious stuff. Here's our thinking process and considerations at this point of the game. Pan is vastly more powerful than SHIB and is playing better. To get 8 thrones, we need to fight SHIB more than Pan. Fighting Pan almost doesn't have any throne benefit except the misfortune thrown between us. TC is still distracting Pan and inflicting losses, so if we are to fight him, now is the best time. Both Pan and Arithia are concerned about SHIB's numbers and throne potential, which I am eagerly helping with by sharing the increasing Ocelotl numbers every other turn. So they generally agree to cast Perpetual together to weaken Shibalba and make throne rush less likely. Perpetual is super good for me and not as much for the others, but I can't afford a big cast myself. So, considering all of the above, the current plan is to convince people to cast Perpetual, and then fight Shibalba with conventional means, not revealing DoDs until it is necessary. If that goes well, the other two should turn on me at some point anyway. A truly evil thing would be to cast Perpetual and then turn on either Pan or Arithia together with Shib, but that is too Machiavellian for me. P.S. Diplo changes are very likely coming next turn. Yeah,
Okay.
so Perpetual Storm and I guess big late game globals in general are another thing that can be very hard to cast for single nation just because of the sheer gem requirements involved. So like I think the only person who could convincingly put up a global and like keep it up against a coalition at this point is Pangea, just because they've been spending fewer gems than the other nations. I think anyone else, like, if you put up a global and other people are, like, teaming up against you, then that global's going down. Whereas if Pangea is contributing to the Perpetual Stormcast, then you don't need to worry about them being the ones to dispel it.
Yeah, and it's turn 84 here, and we still don't have Nexus up. So that would be the other thing that would really influence the globals, and we just don't see that. So
Yeah, Nexus is one of the only ways where a single player can get enough pearls to, like, very reasonably vie for late game globals themselves. Like, basically anything else is an order of magnitude smaller in terms of the gems that you're getting from it.
yeah, the other interesting thing about this is, it further reveals that that Gath is planning on fighting XIB. The other kind of thought I had reading this was that basically he's counting on Pan and Erythia letting him fight Zib and maybe even helping, but then expecting that as he's winning the war against Zabalba, that Pan and Erythia are going to turn on him.
And that
And
seems reasonable, especially, like, if the vibe that he's giving off is that Xibalba is a more likely quick win, then especially given how, like, slowly Pan is comfortable with playing, then he might be like, "Okay, well, if Xibalba is more likely to win in, like, 3 turns and Gath is more likely to win in 20 turns, we can just let them fight." Especially because from their perspective, if they're going to war and obviously, like, research is finished, there's no real cost to deploying mages, at least for Gath, and it's like, well, this is going to be, like, them spending resources, so even though Gath is getting stronger and getting closer to winning, it's good to let them fight, at least for, like, short term. So, like, he wouldn't be expecting to need to fight them at least right away. And that also makes sense from their perspective, right? Because if they don't know about the Dream Horror operation, then the fact that the Blood
right.
Nations are fighting each other instead of teaming up is, like, best case scenario. But the thing that I find more interesting is more that he is actually, like, evaluating the thrones and considering who to fight based off of it, which means that he is very much, like, understanding that they're in endgame and that it becomes more about thrones than, like, wealthy territory.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point too. And, possibly can use these Defiler of Dreams on Thrones as well, since they're not going to desert. The I think the other kind of consideration for if things play out the way Gath is talking about, where he fights Zabalba in essentially like a 1v1, and then the other two players turn on them, is that the other two players, like you were saying, okay, it's good for the blood powers to fight each other. I think there's an asterisk, right? And if the asterisk, it depends on how evenly matched you think they are. If you think, for example, they're going to really tear each other apart, then yeah, that's good. But if you think that Gath is going to crush Zabalba, then it's actually kind of not good because Zabalba might spend a lot of their resources fighting Gath in a 1v1. And then, like, if you join the like 3v1 against Gath after he's defanged Zabalba, then it's not really a 3v1 anymore. It's like a 2.5v1. And kind of given how Arythia is playing, it might be more of like a 1v1, or like a one
Where
and a
Pan
half
is the only
v1.
Yeah, where
You're
Pan is the
right.
only relevant power, yeah. I
So
think that
Pan is risking throwing like letting Zabalba get trashed alone, and then we'll have to deal with Gath by themselves, potentially.
that's fair, but again, that requires that you make the evaluation that Gath is just that much stronger than Xibalba, and that Gath is the only, like, opponent worth fighting, and if you've made that decision, then you need to fight Gath right now anyways. And
Yeah.
so, like, just because of the fact that Pan isn't, like, squaring up against Gath, or at least that we haven't seen any indication that they're forming a coalition against Gath, that doesn't seem to be where their mind is at.
And I don't think if I were getting scouting reports from Gath every turn of what Zabalba has, and if Zabalba was giving me scouting reports of what Gath has, I don't I don't think I would I think I would probably be convinced that they would tear each other apart rather than one side would get stomped. So I think that's a very reasonable thing for Pan to think. Um
Agreed, yeah. The other thing is that it's hard to oversell Ozelotls. Like, Ozelotls really are just that good. In this particular case, the, like, shock volt resistance hole is something that Gath can, like, very seriously exploit. But, like,
yeah.
having these super mobile high damage sacreds, it just isn't something that, like, most things can easily counter, right? Because there really isn't a direct counter to these things in general.
Well, there is. It's about to go up. It's perpetual storm. So
Right. So
they're not
Storm
going to be hypermobile, and they're not going to be like flying. They're basically going to be worse Seir.
That's true. Yeah, like with Perpetual Storm up, then they are just like on the seer level, and the fact that Gath actually has like a bless that's going to match up better in this case because he has the lightning damage to back it up, is also going to influence that a fair bit.
Yeah. I think one way that's maybe like a middle ground for players to look at is that with like they're going to give presumably Gath. I'm guessing they're helping him put up Perpetual Storm. I think they should not. And the reason is because if Zabalba starts winning, like they win a major fight, they can then help Gath put up Perpetual Storm. And then they'll get what they wanted, which is this like grindy war where maybe Gath lost a major battle, but is then going to like slowly push back and win against Zabalba. That's what they want. But if they give Gath the opening, like open with Perpetual Storm, you know, that's, yeah, it's going to make it a lot harder for Zabalba to win.
That's true. I
And
don't know how devious the different sides want to be at this point, though. Especially
right.
given that like Pan and Gath just have been working together so far. From Pan's perspective, it could be, yes, we expect Gath to win, but also we're okay with this, and we just like, we hope that it grinds on, but we're okay with helping Gath start out this war with a strong upper hand.
And Pan doesn't really have much to take from Zabalba. Like, they have a pretty limited border, just like this weird bit around the lake with Vettiheim in between them, and not really anything else. So Pan is really not set up to profit from Zabalba falling. Arithia might be, but yeah, not Pan. So I think there's really nice diplomatic ways for Pangaea to say no too. They can be like, hey, look, like I really need my air gems. If I think you can beat Zabalba without it, but if things start going sideways, I definitely don't want Zabalba beating you. I can give you air gems in that case. And that's like a really, like if I were Gath and Pan told me that, I'd be like, oh, this guy's got my back, you know?
Well, the other thing that you could do as Pangaea is to offer to cast the spell. So then, if Gath starts really winning and you need to switch sides, you can just suicide the caster.
Yeah, that's a good point too. That's a really good point. Okay, message from Vettiheim. 3 candles left.
Oh shoot, I'd forgotten about that. That is actually one of the best
Ignoble
ways to
end.
kill them. Yeah.
Yeah. Ignoble end if I go down. Bummer. Hate to be let down. Definitely thought my candles would hold out a bit easier like 5 or 6 turns ago. After the holidays, I could just aim for a fun magic phase, counter Throne Rush play or something. No one really wants to push my capital, but pushing out is fairly pointless. Without explicit peace agreements and diplomacy changing dramatically where my neighbors are going to actually be occupied. I briefly debated trying to parlay out a war versus Agartha, so at least I could outlast them. But it's a bit tough to reach now.
Yeah, it is very hard to survive on Dominion when you're that low. I mean, preaching is pretty big.
Yeah.
Like, just, being able to do that is probably, like, the best way of staying alive. But if you're getting pressured enough that you can go into, like, deep negative candles, then you basically can't preach through that anymore.
Yeah, and I think what they'll have to do is do Bishop Fish here, which, it's perfectly set up for it. It's an underwater province. They've got Maelstrom. But you basically need Holy Threes. And because you've got to get your candles high enough such that when the wave of Dominion comes in, it's not going to knock down. Basically, what will happen is you'll preach up to 6 friendly candles with Bishop Fish, and then you have to hope that when the like temple check waves come through, they don't knock out those 6 candles. And that could totally happen. So
yeah, especially given just how big the few remaining empires are. Those like Dominion waves, as you called them, are just going to be hitting hard enough to knock out a single province in a turn.
Yeah. And like Pangaea has every province templed. So
as they should. I mean, they're not a Bloodsack nation, and they have 200 gold temples. They really should have every province templed.
Yep. Okay, let's see if we get any cool battles here. We have Ghost Riders going against Tianchi here. This looks kind of interesting. We got an Orithian Tart coming in with a Fluffer. Oh, wow.
It's a feeble-minded Tartarian.
Feeble-minded Tart. I thought this was Magic Phase, but it's not.
Yeah, Ward Mages are very expensive to Magic Phase because they can only do that via Fairy Trod.
Right.
Or I guess they're stealthy, so they could already be in the province.
But yeah, so this guy's super vulnerable to magic, like Mind Hunt. This would be a great thing to target. Actually, the only problem with Mind Hunting this province is that the Worm Mage you have to kill twice, I believe. But the Tart, this is like a 13 MR Tart that you can just, With
Yeah,
pin
but
gear, that's
TNG doesn't have that many big astral mages.
yeah, that's fair.
They kind of like are in desperate need of astral mages, in fact. So they're one of the few like remaining relevant sides that can't like reliably mind hunt something like that.
Yeah, we've got an Erythian mage coming in here. Let's see if this guy's naked.
Yeah, naked
Yeah,
lich rating is kind of something that you expect to see just all over the place this late in the game, just because they're so
yeah,
cheap.
yeah.
Like even if like they weren't immortal, that's a pretty budget price to pay for a thug. So the immortality like kind of pushes over the top where like you can just hit very very many provinces with liches and have it be cost effective.
Okay, so I don't think there's much to see. I'm not sure. I think no. I'm not sure what TNG was talking about. Maybe it was something here. I don't know what the move was they were thinking about that was really risky. I'm sure they'll put in the comments, but I can't tell. This fort's popped, which is interesting. We might get a battle there next turn.
Yeah, given how many harpies are over there, it looks like Pangea just basically moved over a swarm, and then those can dissipate.
Yeah, speaking of thrones, this TNG throne is about to go to Zabalba. How many thrones does Zabalba have? Only 3. And we don't. Who is the throne of misfortune? I think that's Pan.
I think
I
so.
think that's Pan. Golden Throne, Throne of Misfortune. Yeah. Okay, so that's Pan. So yeah, so Zabalba just has 3 thrones, or about to have 4 if they get that one from TNG.
Which is not a
Arithia is.
which is not a foregone conclusion because we've seen TNG beat these Ocelotl stacks before.
That's true. Yeah, and the throne isn't popped yet, so he's just making maneuvers at it. Agartha's got 1 throne, which I love.
And that's a good throne too. Like I would definitely go kill Lagartha to take that throne.
Yeah, get some growth and precision. Why not? Crystal throne. So Gath has 4, which I think is the highest. Pan has Pan and Gath both have 4. Okay.
Right, they're at parity. What I'm surprised about is that Arithia is still holding on to 3 because like if you look at them on the map, they're not that big. So like those 3 thrones are basically like the extent to which they could have thrones. Like you can see
Yeah,
one's jutting into Pangean territory there.
I think we're seeing the weakness of the Erythian build right here too. Like the play hasn't been amazing, but the build, the Myrmicillion was great. Like it gave them a ton of early power. They had a ton of forts going up really quickly. They had a great early part of the war. But like Wish Farm, where is that going to be? Like Nexus casting, all like the nation's just playing very slowly right now. And if you're gonna play Aritzia, I think you have to plan on having Nexus up by like turn 70, or have like a really good Wish Farm operation. So
Yeah, I think that using the Myrmicillion to basically get into a position where you are able to hit the late game and then like basically just invest heavily into that is still viable, but you do need to snowball, right? Because you do need to get that
yeah,
conventional gem advantage in order to be able to afford the incredibly high cost of actually setting up the late game astral stuff.
right.
And
Yeah,
basically,
I think that's a great way to phrase it too, because if you have these other things, like if you had a high astral god, you could afford to kind of go more into a turtle phase. But with the Myrmicillion, what you're saying is you basically need resources from being big to fund your late game projects. You
right.
know?
And I tend to like to play that way just because like when you get big enough, you kind of naturally have a very broad spread of resources, right? Like your gem income is going to be relatively broad just because you're getting it from like sites, which is kind of random. And that
Mhm.
sort of like means that you can basically pivot what you're doing based on what you find. And like maybe you're more death focused this game or more nature focused than what you'd planned. But
Yeah.
ultimately, like you still can afford your big like late game astral projects because they're kind of generic. Like it's relatively cheap to alchemize into. So I do actually think that like an awake snowbally Erythia thing should work fine. It's just that you do actually need to snowball. You can't like sit
Yeah.
still unless, your provinces are just particularly rich and you've already got that astral project going, as you'd put it.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead. We're at 25 minutes. We're gonna do a two turns in one episode thing here. So I'm gonna go ahead and pause, and we'll see you guys on turn 85. Okay, and I got turn 85 pulled up. So you read Gath last time. Do you want to pick up with their
Sure.
message this time?
The Shabalban nap is cancelled and the war starts turn 88. I'm feeling very bad having to declare war on someone who has been friendly or at least neutral all along, but the thing is that Gath is such a lovable nation that everyone who didn't love Gathian ways is long dead. We agreed to cast a shared perpetual, and I persuaded Iri and Pan that I need to be the caster. We actually talked about this a bit last time, but that's
That's
very
funny.
important. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's actually very important for Gath that they keep it because, yeah, and he is, in fact, very cognizant of that. It is important because I want to be flexible in when I want to put it up. Oh, that's also good. Yeah. So Perpetual cancels flying and increases movement costs, so it can be used to disrupt enemy movement on the turn when it is cast, which is very strategically important. Ideally, it is cast on the first or second turn of war. We also agreed to spell condition. It can be put down by killing the caster if 2 of 3 parties decide so, but they need to pay some compensation to the third party. I will be talking about specific war plans and ideas over the next turns. Yeah, I think that's a little more
This is
involved.
a
Yeah.
it's more involved. This is also Gath basically weaseling his little contract here because okay, like I can't imagine that Pangea Warp PC, you're watching this comment. There's no way you don't know what this clause is for. This clause is specifically so that when Gath is stomping the shit out of Zabalba, and you guys are like, oh fuck, we shouldn't have done Perpetual Storm, we can cause Gath to suicide his caster, but then we're going to have to pay him compensation. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's
I
interesting that that would even come up though, because like when like the times in which you would like, demand that the caster be suicided or, want the caster to be suicided basically means that you want to turn on Gath at that point. At which point,
exactly. You
like,
don't want to send him 100 gems as compensation.
yeah, so like in Gath's case, I don't think that like unless the other side was the one to bring that up, I don't think that I would like want to talk about that and just, this is my caster. I'm not going to suicide him, right? Like, I don't know. I think that like the only reason that you would talk about the suicide thing is if the other side like is if that's something that they would actually want to do. Um,
Yeah,
but
so this is what I'm going to be interested in. Y'all can put in the comments. Did who brought up the dispel condition? Did Gaff offer this, or was this other people saying, "Hey, we're not going to give Perpetual Storm and let you cast it because we would want to be able to kill the caster." And then he's like, "Well, I'll kill it if you agree to compensate me 100 gems or something."
yeah,
That would be, but I still wouldn't do it. Like that's just a weird. I'm not going to send you 100 gems if I need to turn on you. What's going on here?
yeah, if that's something that was like a requirement for Gath being the one to cast it, I guess I could see him agreeing to that. It's still just it is odd as you pointed out. But yeah, P.S. Our sickle farm has been
Yeah.
revealed in the video last turn, so we are moving it to number 203, anticipating potential attacks from TC or Vedi. Unfortunately, I didn't patrol number 203 before, so there may be enemy scouts there. Going forward, we plan to randomly alternate between land and water provinces to make it harder to predict in case someone has silly ideas. At the same time, we are not really enemies with Vediheim or TC anymore, so I doubt they would want to attack my province. Yeah, Gath has positioned himself very, very well diplomatically.
Yeah.
Postscript found 850 slaves this turn. It is obviously a very lucky roll, but it means that the average should be at least 700, which is more than I would expect. It will get lower next turn because of logistics, and then again when the war starts because I'm still using real troops for patrolling, and also border provinces will be in danger. In addition, the provinces are obviously being depleted, but I am still managing reasonably high slave counts, even in depleted ones because of rebirth shenanigans. With Perpetual and its minus 20% to income, gold cost of blood slaves drops even further, so it makes sense to hunt as hard as upkeep allows. Overall, I was not chilling during this peacetime, as I'm coming out of it with a lot more power than when my war with Vediheim concluded. I'm confident that peacetime is a resource, and it is very important to use it well. Now, after all these peaceful victories, Gathian people are calling for military ones again.
Right. Message from Zabalba. This turn, Gath has told us they're starting their knack tick down with us. What's funny is I asked Fullick to talk to Gath about the storm demons on our border last turn, and at that point, the story was that the storm demons were there to help with patrolling for blood hunters. Now it's clear they got moved there to reach staging provinces to attack us when the nap ends. Fullick and I are hopeful about this war, but my spidey senses are tingling, and we might get the others joining the war against Zabalba. Ooh.
What's funny
Spidey
to me,
senses are usually very well attuned to backstab betrayal. Once you've been playing Dominions for about 2 years, you get very good. Like, you get that itch in your back, and you know what that is. Like, it's like other players haven't talked to you in a couple turns, or they're like cagey when you've talked to them or whatever. And it's like, oh, fuck, I'm about to get stabbed.
yeah, so two things I want to say. One is that I actually believe that Gath was in fact using the storm demons to patrol. And the reason for that is, first of all, they just talked about the fact they're using real troops to patrol. Storm demons is like, high move flying guys with high precision do actually have high patrol value. So like it makes total sense to use storm demons if you're not fighting anyone to patrol because, well, you've got them, right? But the second thing is that because they're so mobile and because they've got like a countdown on actually invading, the storm demons don't need to be moved up to the border 4 turns before you attack someone. They probably were actually just patrolling. Then the other thing is that to kind of go on what you said about like how you can kind of like feel backstabs coming. In Online Mafia, if you've ever played that, people like to talk about like gut in terms of like an instinctive response. And I've always thought that like gut feelings or the spidey senses in this case are basically like stuff that you can perceive but can't quite like elucidate. Like that
Yeah.
you do know subconsciously because our brains are very good at noticing things.
Yeah.
So even if you can't put it into words, like it is something that like you've actually thought about and you just can't say like this specific thing is why I think that they're betraying us. But in
Yeah.
this case, we also know.
It can be super subtle things, like they're being nice to us, they're saying nice things, but it's like 10 words shorter than it would normally be. Like you can't say that's why I have a weird gut feeling about it.
Right, but
But
it's
like
something that your brain picks up on.
it's something your brain picks up, yeah.
But in this case, I think that it's more that the other people knew that Gath was going to fight Chibalba, but I don't think that they're planning
Yeah.
on like getting involved in the war. But it amounts to the same thing of like that they do in fact know that this is coming and don't necessarily wish Chibalba well.
Right. Also the storm demons, once perpetual storm goes up, are going to be really good against whatchamacallit, against Zabalban stuff.
Oh yeah.
Because the Aussies are going to have to be waddling in, like walking forward. They're going to be shooting bolts at them. Aussies don't have shock resistance, by the way. The storm demons are going to have like Will of Fates and all sorts of shit on them. It's going to be, yeah.
The one thing that I will say though for Ozlotls under Perpetual Storm is that they at least do have high base combat speed, whereas Beast Bats
Yeah.
do not. Beast Bats have like 3, I think. So they
Oh,
just
God.
they're like corpse constructors, gelatinous cube levels of slow if they can't fly.
Oh, goodness. All right, so we have Arithia attacking Tianqi's cap here. This looks exciting. 2 liches.
Oh, this
One with
looks
the
like a
heroic.
ping.
Oh no. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh god.
This is one of those. It can
Cubes.
beat just PD, but it's not going to beat any like genuine defense.
Oh, he caused some earth elementals in swarm casts, so fair
Trigger
amount of
jump
gems here. Yeah.
That looks like a living earth cast given the size of the elementals.
Yeah, let's go check real quick. See
But yeah,
how many
you always
gems
want to
got
check to
burned.
see what's there, and then we've kind of talked about this in like a couple other different cases, that using something like this where it's good enough to beat PD and good enough to spend gems both gets you an idea of like what is actually defending it here. And if there is no defense, if like, TNG cheapens out and just has the PD here, then you get to put the province under check.
Where did I miss it? Where are the earth elementals?
You can check the casters real
Oh,
quick.
here they are. Wait, did they? Wait.
That's a slave matrix, yeah, so he's not casting anything.
I'm sorry. I'm like really clumsy right here.
Well, it's been a while since we played Dominion, so makes total sense.
That's true. Living Earth. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not a ton of gems. The other thing this does is by just scouting it and seeing what it is, it's going to cause TNG to need to change up the script and change up the commitment level. So this is just like a really annoying thing to do to somebody to increase the amount of micro they need to spend on turns.
And increase the resources that they need to spend, especially given that TNG does not have like a bank of gems in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is just an empty fort.
So this was the fort that they popped last turn.
Right. You can see they moved all the siege chaff off. I expected them to scatter, but they actually just moved it all into one province. I guess they have enough nature mages they can get away with it.
I mean, there was a significant TNG army here. I was kind of thinking TNG might ride out this turn. I was looking forward to a battle potentially. But it looks like they moved back to the cap.
Well, one of the problems is also that their retreats could be cut. Because like you see that Arithia has that other fort under siege, and that had been under siege last turn. So if there's like some magic phase attack in order to cut the fort that they're coming from, that could be a total wipe.
Yeah, that's a great point. But still, I mean, I think it's worth. I don't know. I mean, if you take an all in, if you think you might win it.
Yeah, but it's a much bigger commitment, and a lot of TC's strength in terms of like what they're able to do defensively comes from that Vengeful Waters.
Yeah.
So when they're fighting without that being like a possibility or having that like influence the fight, it's
Yeah,
not a
and
fight.
there's no candles here anymore. So I guess yeah, if it doesn't have Vengeful Waters Dominion, then it's not a province TNG can hope to hold in the long run anyway.
Yeah. So between the two, I wasn't actually seriously expecting a battle there.
Now Zabalba moved off this throne, which is interesting. This is the
Yeah,
Throne of Fire or
that's what
Fortune. Okay.
that's actually where I was expecting to see fighting because like we talked about before, like Xibalba had popped that, I believe, and also we had expected TNG to actually try to put a defense there just because they had been able to beat those Ocelotl stacks before. I'm guessing that the reason that there is no battle there is in fact that Xibalba's trying to get ready to fight Gath and doesn't want to lose
Yeah.
any more units than is necessary. So they probably pieced out with TNG.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes total sense. Though I imagine if Gath's looking at thrones, they're probably looking at this one too.
Yeah.
But I imagine they want to kill all the Zabalban troops around here first.
I think that they would have assumed that Xibalba would have already had that throne, but
Yeah.
they didn't want to mess up their war timing by like trying to greed for Xibalba having already taken it, which also makes total sense.
Yeah. Let's see. No more guys getting patrolled out of 249.
There's that province was pillaged.
The most, yeah, there must be a tart here or something.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're just trying to get the population out.
No, there is a Tartarian Titan there, so I think that's most
Okay.
likely the culprit.
But yeah, there's no population here. That was another important thing for. I can't remember the reason for it exactly. I think it was so that you can't have unrest because the unrest can reduce the patrol efficiency. I think that was the reason they got the pop. I mean, it's also going to happen naturally. If you set up a Defiler of Dream farm and you're patrolling it, you're eventually going to kill all your population because the Defiler of Dreams causes a ton of unrest.
I know that unrest also reduces patrol strength, but I think it's to a cap of 15 or something like that.
Oh,
It's not
okay.
like unrest does reduce patrol strength, but it's not like a massive amount when you're talking about like the enormous volume of patrol strength that Gath has. I think that you might be right that it might have to do with unrest doing something else that they wanted to avoid.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's it for this turn. And I think it's probably going to be another couple slow turns until we get to turn 88 when the war breaks out with Zabalba. So do you have any kind of closing thoughts here, Sai?
No, I agree. I think that we're going to see a slow push in against TNG, basically as Dominion allows, in part because of how conservatively Pan has been playing, and because of how effectively TNG has been able to punish Erythea being like either greedy or sloppy. So between the two, I think that like TNG is not going to like necessarily retake ground or even like hold on to anything, but that it's going to take a very long time for them to die because Pangaea is doesn't feel right now the pressure to like, oh, I need to go to kill TNG fast. Similarly, neither TNG nor Erythea, based on Gath's messages, are actually getting involved in that war, which means that they don't need to like actually pull forces out of TNG. So I think that things are going to stay stable on that front, and we'll be seeing more turns like the last couple, where like there might be one or two provinces being lost or pushed, or a fort under siege, or something to that effect. But we probably will see only like one or two more big battles out of TNG before they're dead. And
Yeah.
yeah, just
I
based on
don't know
the
if there's going to be time for that, though, because the war with Zabalba can go pretty quickly. Like things. It's possible, like what you said at the earlier this episode, that everybody wants is that not Pan, Gath and Zabalba have this super grindy war where they both kill each other's armies but don't take much ground. But it's very easy that doesn't happen. And if that doesn't happen, the diplomacy is going to need to change very quickly. And then like Pan's going to have to evacuate this area because like fighting Gath or Zabalba, whoever's pulling ahead, is not going to be a small deal. It's going to be a really big deal. They're going to need all of their stuff.
I agree. I also think, though, that as we'd kind of both been alluding to, both of us think that Gath is going to be very heavily favored in this war, in part just because of like the secret or Defilers of Dreams, which they can pull out if they have to, but also just that in the Death Stack versus Death Stack, they're going to have an advantage, and Chivalva's
Yeah.
normal mobility advantage is going to go away with Perpetual Storm. So yeah, like we're definitely both expecting Gath to be winning in that fight. But yeah, you're right that Pangaea is going to need to be able to actually respond to it, and they're definitely not in position to do so now. But I also don't think that Pan is thinking about it that way. Like whether it's just wishful thinking or whether they're overestimating Xibalba's capabilities more so than we are, or maybe we're wrong and they're right, and and it is going to be like a relatively even war. But it seems that that's what they're expecting, right? Like if you look at that,
I
their
don't think.
actual
Yeah, I
gameplay.
think it's I think it's a like actual mistake though to expect it to be grindy. I think it's reasonable to say I don't know which way it's going to go because I don't know which way it's going to go. Like it would make sense Zabalba could have so many, like, late game toolkit Zabalba is so fucking sneaky. Like, they could have 50 assassins in a province. That's not even a big deal, right? They could have, they're also starting to mass these dark vines. These dark vines are really good. You put mass region on them, they're sick. Like, they have really interesting things they can do. I could see them winning against this Gath. I'm not
Or
favoring it. I'm with you, but I don't think you can count on the war being a stalemate. I think if you're playing Pan, you have to count on one side winning decisively, but maybe you don't know yet which one that's going to be.
right. So you're saying that what Gas or what Pan should be doing rather is getting set up in order to like fight this out, either by trying to kill TNG very quickly or by ending their commitment in TNG just
Yeah.
by like piecing out.
I think right now with with Gath ending their nap with Zabalba, I think you make peace with TNG. You say, "Hey, dude, good job putting Vengeful Waters up. How about we have peace and you can just fight Arithia?" In my opinion, TNG takes that deal 10 times out of 10, right?
Does Arithia take that deal though? Because that might piss off your one reliable ally. Because regardless of who of the two you're fighting, you probably, like presumably at least, want Arithia on your side. And because you're looking at that astral power stuff, they most likely want to be working with Arithia late game, or I should say long term, because we are very deep into the late game at this point.
Yeah, I mean, you could even say, "Hey, how about you peace out with both of us?" And then you tell Arithia, like, "Hey, we've got to get ready to jump on whoever's winning, be it Zabalba or Gath."
But
You know,
who does TNG fight? Like, what is TNG gonna do?
they go fight a Gartho. Anything. Like,
Okay, yeah,
she's, let the kids play in the playground or whatever.
that's fair. Yeah, I think as TNG, I'd probably take that just because I think I could see a more even fight against one smaller power being fun. It depends on if TNG wants to do a last stand or if they want to keep playing.
Right.
But yeah, yeah,
But
I could.
also you can tell they're like fatigued from having to fight all the players. That was like one of the messages Latch sent this turn or last turn.
Yeah, and that's true too. It's not fun when you're fighting like a long losing war like this, just because it takes a very long time to die, and like opening a turn where you're losing isn't fun, right? Because you're
Right.
losing. Everyone likes winning, and the fact that like you're spending literally weeks upon weeks of just constantly losing and not really able to do anything about it, like that is pretty demoralizing.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. That is what it can feel like. Yeah, but I think my key kind of end of episode takeaway from this is Pan and Arithia need to be planning to act very quickly on whoever starts winning the Gath Zabalban war.
Right. But it looks like they're not. So, well,
Right.
my
And TNG
expectation,
is the thing stopping that, I think, right now.
yeah, my expectation is that we'll basically see that front continue, but grinding on as it is, and that we'll also start seeing Gath push into Shabalba very quickly. Those are
Yeah.
my two expectations.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for joining me, Sai.
Absolutely. Thanks for hosting.
And viewers, if you have made it all the way to episode 82 or 3 or whatever this is, thank you for sticking with us in this series. It's one of, I think, the better Dominions games that's been played, and you guys have seen some really crazy new strategies come out with the Defiler of Dreams and all these other mass communion vortex of returning shenanigans. So many things. So I
I
hope you're
think
still
that
enjoying it.
I think that one of the things that I would use to like call out this tournament as opposed to others is that we're seeing multiple different players finding ways to exploit mechanics to their fullest. So like
Yeah.
even things that like are like very on the borderline of being a glitch. Things like the double rigger play where like it's basically something that you only see from people who have been playing Dominions a very very long time and something that's only relevant when you get into these games where both sides have very deep mechanical knowledge.
Yeah. All right. We'll see you guys next episode. Take care.
All right, see you then.